Hey guys, welcome to The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. Today we are at a beautiful beach here in central, or actually more like southern Florida now. And there is a problem about 4,500 miles long headed this way that just arrived the other day. Now, this problem is an overabundance of a certain life form, and it has completely inundated the beaches here. I'm about to show you what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about. This is called Sargassum. Now, Sargassum is basically a seaweed, and let me show you what it classically looks like. It classically has these little balls on it right here. And once the main body of this macroalgae, which looks like a seaweed, decays, these little balls that keep it afloat are all that's left. And as it breaks down in the environment at high tide or throughout the day, it's left in heaps. Now right here we're only seeing a little bit of it. However, in certain places it comes in just absolute piles, and the main mass of it is 4,500 miles long, stretching out into the Atlantic, and it has never been seen this large before, or growing this dense this early, any of those things. Now you can see bits and pieces of it where there's normally nothing other than a few other floaty kelp type macroalgae pieces and shells and things. And while it is a birthing area for all sorts of little fish and crustaceans, as well as a feeding area for birds where it floats out in the middle of the Caribbean, when it comes inland into the Gulf or up into the Atlantic coast, it can actually cause problems from everything from sea turtles not being able to bury their eggs properly, all the way to things you wouldn't necessarily think about, but blooms of other kinds that form because just there isn't anything that eats enough of it. And as it is in the water, it just starts kind of rotting already, and it releases a ton of hydrogen sulfide. Now, that in itself is not terrible, but unfortunately, hydrogen sulfide is the same chemical that they add to natural gas so that it smells like stinky, smelly farts and and hard-boiled eggs. And unfortunately, this stuff breaks up really easily, and all those little pieces go everywhere in the water. And in a recent survey by Time magazine, they found that out of every 100 people, that 9 said they'd cancel their trip if this was present to the beach, to Florida, who were planning trips. And that number equals about $1 billion in tourism across Florida alone. Not to mention Texas, the Caribbean, and other places like island nations that actually rely completely on tourism for the mass chunk of their economy. And so here we have just a bit of stinky stuff, but in areas where it's piling up, sometimes 5, 6, 7 feet tall, naturally they have to use tractors and bulldozers and push it into piles and either burn it or bury it or figure something to do with it out. But they think the reason it is blossoming so much beyond just warm water temperatures, which we've seen the likes of before, is runoff from agriculture, from farms, from people fertilizing their lawns, and from all sorts of different endeavors going on agriculturally. And the other problem with it is once it does break down, it actually becomes quite toxic to people with asthma and other respiratory problems like COPD. And it can cause all sorts of issues. And in fact, in the main island of the Bahamian nation, in the main city of Nassau, they actually reported 11,000 cases of acute respiratory toxicity from this, which means that people came into the hospital because of being exposed to this and this alone, with pre-existing conditions, of course. But this stuff not only obviously can be an issue with the hydrogen sulfide, but just like algae and other cyanobacteria, it can have certain chemicals in it that then are essentially compiled or combined, and they snowball until it becomes a problem. And after you get wave of this stuff on your beaches, you end up with algae blooms because of all that extra nourishment and nutrition that's in the water that they kind of sequestered for a time. And also then you get those toxins that can bug animals and humans, and they can actually become airborne when they dry out at the high tide marks, like up on the beach here. So it's quite the conundrum what to do with it, how to get rid of it. In Palm Beach, I know they're actually just removing it all, but it can also cause rashes and allergy and irritations. So it's a bit of a problem. And although in years past they've worried that there wasn't enough for instance, baby eels spawning, lately they're worried that there is far too much. And it remains to be seen just how impactful this bloom will be this year, or if this will be an ongoing thing. But needless to say, it is an interesting problem and something going on that's never been seen in 300 or 400 years of noting what's going on in the Caribbean. Pretty carefully, this is kind of a unique thing. And instead of being a few miles wide, floating in chunks, now we're seeing this giant island or raft of it essentially coming in and just now starting to make landfall and starting to pile up and starting to begin the bad effects that it can have. So stay tuned, stay informed, watch for red tide and other things, but count it as one of the weird oddities of nature in the meantime, and enjoy the nature while you're out there. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.